like to welcome CSSU Madrigal Singers and Carl Recchia, who is their director, and thank them for serenading us before our board meeting tonight. And I have to say, the common topic tonight is indicators, and that is a look at, like, what is it that we know about our kids and how they do that can be an indicator that we're providing a great education for them. And I have to think of a better indicator of the quality of our music program than this group. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much.
So, as you know, this is our rehearsal space, and you guys have displaced us, once a month over the last 3 months. This is the last time, actually, because we're done in December. And I thought, well, how to retaliate? So, after last month's rehearsal that coincided with this, I thought, well, it'd be really nice if we could sing for them. And so I wrote to our dear superintendent, and she seemed to like the idea, and here we are. And what she doesn't know is that these nice folks behind me have 19 songs in their repertoire. So enjoy your meal and dessert. And yeah. So we're going to start with the Velvet Rose. And we have a soloist. I can't remember her name, but she looks just like this.
Upon the red rose vine, I'd climb to touch his window and make his casement fine. Oh, if I were the velvet rose upon a red rose vine, I'd climb to touch his window and make his casement fine. But since I am a maiden, I go with downcast eyes, and he will never hear the songs that he has turned to sighs. And if I were a little bird that twitters on the tree, a day I'd sing, a day I'd sing, a day I'd sing for him, till he should hearken me. And since I am a maiden, my love will never know, that I could kiss him with a mouth.
We're really only going to do one more song. I made copies of our performing arts calendar for you just to get a sense of what they do. We count the 16 Polar Express performances as one. We have about 10 or 11 performances that we do. And this calendar will expand as the year goes on as we bring more singers into the mix. But we like to go and sing for area senior residences and gatherings, and we've been doing that for a long time. And I just want to thank you for doing what you do so I get to work with these glorious kids and do what I do. And we get to do what we do. So we're grateful for you. Thanks. This is the Parting Glass, the Wailing Jennings tune.
All the money that e'er I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night, and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I've had are sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I've had would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night, and joy be with you all. Good night, and joy be with you all.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, I don't feel so bad. I don't think they need more practice. I don't have to move all the agenda around. This is good. Cross that stuff off. There was.
Not that we were counting.
Oh, wow.
But if I knew we were counting all of that. Just kidding.
All right, so I'd like to call to the meeting to order, the official and far less exciting part of the meeting. This is the CSSU Board of School Directors regular meeting of November 18th, 2014. Let's see, we're going to start with adjustments to the agenda. First of all, I don't know if you all got the note, but the common topic was not updated in the package. So our common topic today is indicators, a data presentation, continuation from last month. So sorry about that. I apparently don't have to move the agenda all around because Elaine and Bob aren't here yet. That's,
We showed up.
that's right. So
You're gonna make a correction to one of the, or to the minutes?
we're gonna make a quick correction to the minutes, so we'll pull that off and put that under action matters. And is there anything else that people would like to have off of the consent agenda or any other changes to the agenda? I just want to make a comment in case this influences your decision. Cindy included in the package on the policy a protocol. And I just want everybody to make sure that we're clear. We don't vote on the protocol. You're just really voting on the policy, right? So I don't know if that makes a difference to anybody, but that's where we are on that. Okay. So no other changes to the agenda? Okay. Audience and communications. Hearing none. We're on to 4.0 presentations. And Bob, if you've caught your breath.
You heard that sigh? Core budget?
Or SU core budget, yes.
Excellent. Megan and I are gonna do a presentation,
Okay.
the Megan and Bob show. With Mike not too far behind and Cindy next to him.
Bob, will you be singing it? Just thought I'd.
Wait, hold on. Careful what you ask.
Yeah, it's true. Be careful.
I sang happy birthday to a guy I worked for about 10 years ago. He cornered me afterwards and says, you're gonna do two things for the rest of your life. One, you're never gonna sing happy birthday to me, and two, you're never gonna sing in public. You don't want me to hear me sing. So, I just. Yes. There's something humorous here. How many does it take to turn on the projector? So Megan and I are going to do core services this year. In case you missed it, significant changes are going on in the world of special ed between this budget year and next budget year. So hence there's two of us up here. That's highlighted in the first circle of core and student special services. We've broken out student and special education services into kind of a separate subcategory within core. And so that's the way we'll present it this evening. You can follow along in your slides in the packet. I don't think we've made significant changes over what we included. Am I hitting, is this the one I'm supposed to hit or that one?
It should be that one.
Should be.
Really, this is not the technology presentation.
No, I don't know.
Yes, that would be great.
There you go.
And then I'll take over.
You can hear me.
Okay, so none of you can read the data on this chart because you all have it in your packet, but this is the traditional mechanism of presenting budget dollars by category with 2014 budget, the actual from last year, the budget we're operating with this year, and the proposed budget for next year. And then the numbers are out in the far right column relative to percentages and dollar changed. In case you need the executive summary, the significant thing that has occurred on this chart is this additional $14,303,000 that wasn't there in a prior year. That's as a result of moving all the special ed expenses to Megan's circle at the SU and then allocating them back. So your SU budget has gone up dramatically. You want to remember that point when we get to town meetings and other presentations in each of your communities, because your constituents will likely circle that number and wonder what the heck went on. So are we, yes?
Bob, can you tell me or remind me what is included in the SU board budget and why that's up 7.31%?
Yes.
I looked for it later, but I couldn't quite see the. Oh, that's the liability insurance only?
It's board insurance and board recorder have likely been the two changes for one year to the next. We made sure the expenses were in the proper category. Small dollar value, but a big change in that small area of the budget. But it's the services and insurance to support you as a group.
Thank you.
Bob, I had just a question on that liability insurance. It didn't have to do with the movement of special ed to this board, did it? It was just a normal.
No, it's new billing from your insurance carrier one year to the next, adjusting rates in all categories of our insurance. I don't think it was tied to any action we've. Other questions on that slide? May I go to slide number 3? This I summarized changes in each category. Board liability insurance was the big thing in the SU board category. The executive admin and fiscal and human services areas were changed based on salary and benefit assumptions that we've made in the budgeting process this year, with the additional note that human resources is lower based on lower FTE budgeted one year to the next as Cindy adjusts the FTE count among positions that have moved in and moved out. And then finally, as I said earlier, all special ed is now consolidated at the SU, so the numbers went up. Okay? Megan.
And I realize that my charts are very small, and these haven't changed from what's in the presentation, but here's enlarged versions of them. There's 3 separate ones. First, just a little bit of context in terms of where the special ed budget comes from. We start the process in the spring of the previous year, and is driven by the service plan, which is an analysis of all of the IEPs currently and anticipated, and the services and supports that are needed to provide those services. Your previous budgets per school were based on actuals. And your budget that you're looking at here when you are looking at your local allocation is based on your ADM assessment. 504 services are based on actuals in the building because that's not a special ed service. But the key point here is that it is difficult to compare last year to this year because last year you were looking at your actuals and this year you're looking at your assessment based on your ADM share of the total cost.
Megan?
Yes.
Is there an attempt to sort of do the same for 504s as with special ed to ensure that a student in Williston and a student in Charlotte are getting similar services?
It's a good question. The professional staffing associated with 504 moves to the SU because they operate under the same license. But right now, because it's a general ed function, we're not required to move it over, and so it wasn't moved over in the initial movement. I would say that all of the work we've been doing around interventions and best practices covers and is applicable to 504. So whether or not that's a conversation moving forward, it's possible. But I would say they're also benefiting from the work on intervention that's happening, even though it's still held local in terms of cost. So if you see the number that you could look at down below here is we are looking at about a 5.2% increase in total special ed costs between last year and this year. All right, next one. All right, so that's perfect. So this is a chart that you have the enlarged version on. It's very hard to see here, but this is a look at what the local allocations are per school. So you can see total costs on the top line assessed by ADM, except for 504, and backing out the revenue that we anticipate, and then these are the net assessments back to schools. And so you can see it's difficult to compare. The assessment previously from last year locally just included the costs of SU purchased special ed services, and now the assessment includes all services.
So what are we supposed to be trying to compare?
This is looking at special ed costs K through 12, triple E costs K through 8, essentially, because CVU doesn't have an assessment for that. This is 504 is actual, and this is psych services, and Mike, what's an instructional improvement?
It's the contractual tuition reimbursement for support in professional staff.
Right. Oh, that's right. So things like the cost associated with professional development for special educators it gets wrapped into this cost where it hadn't sat there before because it used to come out of the building level. So really you're comparing the, Charlotte's FY15 allocation was just their portion of purchased services. Now it's their portion of special ed costs plus triple E plus those DIP services that we talked about and their share of 504 and psych services.
So the far right column is what they will see in their budget as a SU allocation for special ed.
Correct.
And all these things all added together this year.
Correct.
But the far left one is only what they got
last year,
and they would have to add that to their special ed for last year.
In order to compare last year's to this year.
So can we get that from, I mean, obviously.
Yep.
It's in your budget.
Yep.
Yes.
We can. Okay, so we're obviously going to have further conversation when we talk last month, so this is just a high-level snapshot, but just so you have a sense of what are the primary drivers in special ed costs, the bulk of the increase this year is based on assumptions, so that's staffing, salary, and benefits. We have small increases in physical therapy and psych services. There's a 0.4 increase in physical therapy services. That's based on services in the service plan that are needed to provide IEP services. And the small increase in FTE of psych services, which is a 0.2 increase, comes off of, you probably recall reading in a COLT report last year that we hired someone to come in and do an audit of our school psych services and look at making sure all of our schools have access to what our national recommendations would be in terms of psych services. And although as an SU, in the aggregate, we were in a good range. A couple of our schools, CVU was one of them, wasn't meeting that staffing ratio. So there's a small increase in psych services. Transportation is always a cost driver. One particular increase this year is that in the EEE transportation line, Charlotte, previous to this year, or previous to this budget, did not provide EEE transportation, which is not consistent with how the rest of the EEE programs in the SU function, and quite honestly is something that needed to be sort of right-sized. So part of the increase in transportation is adding bus runs that didn't exist before. Tuition is kind of a perennial cost driver, although what I would say about this year is, particularly at CVU, Anna and her staff have done a lot of work around decreasing the need for students to access outside placements, and have brought back actually quite a number of students and anticipate doing that. So I list that up here as a potential, but actually this year there's been a lot of work done around there. And the last line that I just am putting in there is, prior to this consolidated budget, most schools built in their special ed budget some form of contingency to account for students moving in or unanticipated costs. So we've included those collective contingencies in this budget. Moving forward, we'll need to analyze whether or not we need that much contingency anymore now that we have a larger system that can soften the peaks and valleys.
I kind of was going to ask a question related to that, that since we're in a bigger system now, there's more protection in the system.
Yep.
Is there a way to back test that and not put the contingency in this year if we don't need it?
I think that's one of the things that we can talk about. When each school looks at how much they put in, they look at whether or not they've used it over the past number of years. And so there have, at least in my time here, some schools have backed off on how much contingency they put in. So that is one of the things that can be looked at if we decide that we don't need to hold that much aside for contingency.
And how much is it? Is it 20% of the budget, 10%?
Oh, I wouldn't be able to pull that off the top of my head, but it's certainly not 20%. It's more.
10%.
Yeah.
10%?
Yeah.
You may have provided this, but do we have an ADM increase, decrease percentage someplace?
Well, what you have on the next, actually, I'll advance the slide, but there's nothing on it. Actually.
The staffing summary?
You do have the comparative data chart that has, it doesn't have historic, are you talking, actually, you said ADM, and I interpreted that as child count. Are you looking for number of students eligible?
We're seeing we saw a 2% increase last year. We're seeing a 5% increase next year. Does that coincide with increased need? More kids?
That will be displayed on
Correct.
your next chart.
Yes.
The ADM we use to allocate your cost is the percentage split. We haven't updated it yet for ADM numbers we don't yet have. They will come out in December, and so we'll, one of the budget tweaks you'll get in late December will be adjustments to this data based on the AOE's published ADM numbers. But that just determines split. You're more interested in has the number of kids served changed, right?
I know we're going to get asked the question, so yeah, at some point.
And that should come out on this.
It will, yep. Any other questions on this? Again, knowing that this is just a snapshot. Again, you have, oh, sorry, Russ.
So the 5.2% is total roll-up from all of CSSU. Do we know yet what that looks like rolled out, or, spread out to the district level? Because going from actual expenses to ADM, I'm going to guess that there are some that are perhaps quite a bit higher than 5.2% and some that are going to be lower than 5.2%.
Yes, and the baselines that you have in your package tonight locally, it includes the allocation of these costs using the ADM percentages that are not yet updated.
Okay.
Go ahead, yeah.
I mean, I guess it's probably hard to do, but are there any savings to doing it this way? I mean, would it have been 5.2% total for everybody, just split up differently if we hadn't changed methodologies?
Well, what I would say is that how we build the budget is still directly related to services and supports written into IEPs, which is sort of a yes to the second part of your question, which is these services are based on what kids need. Are there, as we move forward toward consolidation, opportunities for efficiencies in cost, things like that? Yes, I think there probably are. We're not at the point yet where we're realizing those.
Okay, so there's no sort of economies of scale yet that we're
Correct.
benefiting from?
Well, one economy of scale that we just talked about, and I guess that's not exactly the right tag for it, but is that notion that in contingency, when each of you are standing alone, you need to have enough contingency and maybe in any given year, only one of you faces that, or two of you. If you're all together, certainly there's an opportunity to have a discussion about reducing that, because in a way, you're in an insurance trust with each other. So there's a possibility for that saving this year. That's a discussion, at the next budget meeting,
Yes.
I would say.
So does that just kind of roll over from year to year? If you budgeted 1 year for contingency that didn't come to pass?
When it was local, yes.
You'd just roll it out, you wouldn't have to take another contingency the next year?
No, you'd roll it up because you wouldn't know. And obviously,
Well,
if
no,
you
you couldn't keep it.
use that contingency in 1 year,
Right, but if you did.
the next year, you're going to be adding another one.
Right, but if you didn't use it, did it just?
Be in your fund balance.
It would be in your fund balance, right?
It's not like it's a separate fund that
Right.
is set aside for, special ed contingencies.
But you'd apply that fund balance most likely towards the
Right.
next budget,
Mhm.
and then have a different contingency.
Right.
So it rolls over, but not really.
Okay. This chart, you have a bigger version of it. I'm just going to point to sort of the left side. Well, first I'll tell you, this middle column is this current year's staffing. The right-hand side is next year's projected staffing, and this is just a minimized version of this. This splits it out between schools so that you can see what your local staffing is. But the highlights of this chart are there are no FTE changes in administrator, administrative assistant, or teachers. Paraeducators, as an SU, we're looking at a decrease of 3 FTE. That paraeducator line also includes 2 instructional interpreters that we needed to bring on staff as a result of the closing of the Vermont Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So really, if we didn't have those 2 positions, we'd have 5 fewer paraeducators. So there's a slight reduction. This is the increase in psychologist services that I told you about, and increase in physical therapy, and no anticipated changes in OT, FTE.
So how are the staffing decisions made on an individualized school basis? For example, I'm looking at Williston, seeing almost 4 positions cut. Can you give some insight onto how that analysis?
So your next chart that you have, that is not on here because it would be really small up here, is the SU comparative data. And we've done this analysis for the past, certainly the time that I've been here, and also a number of years before that. That looks at a number of things, like your child count, your array of disability categories served, how many EEE students, how many professionals, how many support staff. And so the analysis I think that you're talking about is done in the course of, so use the example of professional staff. the range that we would look for a school to have is called special education density. There's a lot of research to support that schools are best able to serve the needs of their entire population if they have a density of between 1 and 50 and 1 and 80, meaning 1 special educator, 2 between 50 and 80 total student body. So one measure that we look at is to make sure that our staffing falls somewhere within that range. There's a lot, that comparative data is what drives additional conversations about what's the right amount of staffing per school. An example of that is that 2 years ago, we reduced our building level special education administrator by just under 0.5 in order to make the ratio consistent across the SU. So that's an example, I mean, that's in a way an example of kind of a scale that allowed us to reduce the service. You don't see that reduction here because it happened 2 years ago. But that's an example of the way that we use that data to analyze what's the right staffing level. But also understanding that all of your systems are different. You serve a slightly different population of students, and we try to approach the work from a, here are the standards of practice, and your model might look different across building to building because of the differences in your system.
I think it's also important you understand the working process behind it, Josh, to pull all the numbers together was unchanged, roughly unchanged through the school process. Megan and I and Michael and Cindy still met with the same group of people in each of the 5 schools in the September-October timeframe and rolled up the necessary plan expense by school, or the plan by school, and then summed it into this data. So what we need in each school is still being developed the same way.
As in previous years?
Yes.
Okay.
It just got added together because we had to consolidate it onto one financial review.
Okay.
Additional questions?
Oh, back to me.
Back to you. I'm done.
I guess I just have one.
Yeah.
Is there a single, a 5% increase seems like it's pretty steep. I've never actually seen it all together, so I'm not sure. And is there one driver? Because it doesn't seem.
I think the drivers that listed a few, about 4% of that is assumptions in staffing, salary, benefits. And so that explains the bulk of it. Small increases in psych and...
Yeah, those all seem small, so it's really just the staffing required from the service plans has gone up.
Correct. That is the primary driver.
Gene, this is our first year to kind of do this, and the quality of the presentation that Megan and I can put to you is a disadvantage because we're in the first year.
Yeah.
So we don't have the traditional, well, what's the column look like in the prior year? So we collectively decided that since 80% of the cost is in staffing, we needed to provide you visibility of staffing changes year to year. And then exactly as you've begun to think, what are the other 4 things that cause the difference to account for the other percentage, or 1.2%? It's our first attempt at it. If there's some additional information that you need to feel comfortable or to understand it, we're more than happy to come back, and that's why we planned this over more than one presentation, knowing that there might be those kind of questions.
Yeah, I think I know you get to the point where you can't go too deeply into it, but there are certain things like, is it salary and benefits? Is it, really additions? We have more kids that need more help, or fewer kids that need less intensive help, or, I know it's really difficult to work around the edges, but I appreciate the good start, so.
That'd be useful, just without, down to the penny, just conceptually, is it more students, is it the same student numbers with more intensive plans? Is it the same number of plans but more expensive delivery, just to get a concept?
We'll have to work our way through this as a maturing thing, because.
We'll work on that and work on the contingency conversation, and make sure they're part of the next presentation.
I was just going to offer that it might be helpful to start developing an FAQ, frequently asked questions list, because we're all going to have to be explaining this to our communities. And so, if we're asking a lot of questions, I think it's because we're thinking ahead to the questions that we might be asked.
Now, in local budgets, it won't,
Well, go.
in local budgets, it will be primarily driven by the ADM change, right? When they look at, someone looks at the SU budget and 1,000% increase in special ed, that might cause.
Let me do that slow. The total pool will be 5.2% higher. It is likely that one of you around the table will get more of the 5.2%, and others will get less. So it's a mix of both.
Right.
And to the notion of an FAQ, I just think about the system that CVU has in place during budget season. They designate one person who gets all the questions, who then distributes the questions to Bob, and in this case, Bob, Megan, and I. So it would be great, Chair, if you would ask if somebody would be willing to take the questions.
I'd be happy to do that, but I think Colleen's talking about something that we could share with the public.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's the same thing. It's the same
I'm just
thing.
thinking the questions that you have are the questions that the public
Yeah,
will
I'll-
have, and we can be developing it as we go
Yeah.
along.
You help us with the questions, that would be great, because we're in the swamp too long to really.
To know what you might want to know.
Well, the process we have at CVU is really, since we have such a large board and several budget buddies, rather than having 17 people sending notes to Jeff all at once, somebody brings them all to a single focal point who consolidates and eliminates duplicates and sends them to Jeff for review. So do I have a volunteer who'd like to do that for
I
us?
thought I heard you volunteer for that.
Are you looking at Elaine?
No, I could have sworn I heard Jean say, I'll do that.
Well, heck, I'd just answer them, but
Well, that makes it easy.
Yeah,
Well,
that
could
makes
you
sense
send
too.
could you forward the questions with the answers, please?
But I think I just want to advocate for us funneling, being in the practice of funneling our questions through the chair anyway. So I would nominate you, Jean.
I'm more than happy to do it if people don't mind.
Good practice for us.
Along with that, any data that does show sort of those trends Eric was talking about, because I think the big questions will be, especially for the schools who are going to see a significant increase, will be that, why are we switching to ADM? But, we've been telling our constituents that with all these tiered interventions, we can expect there to be, over time, some reduction in special ed needs. So if there's any sort of trending that can help us with those kinds of inquiries, that would be great.
So in the interest of time, is there any other questions?
Final two slides, they're somewhat unchanged from prior years. We've got to update final budget numbers late December when we get final information. Your health benefit increase year to year is budgeted at 10 right now. It is likely it will be a single-digit number, closer to 5 when they finish. We have nothing official. The letter should be coming out shortly, and when it does, we'll share that all with you. But it's looking like it has prior years, that they'll celebrate the fact that it's closer to 5 rather than 10.
I think we got an email with that number in it. I've seen it.
I didn't get the
I mean, it was like a VSBA thing, I think. Maybe I just made that up.
No, there have been numbers circulated, but none of them official.
Well, I agree with that. I agree with that.
And then lastly, we have 2 decision packets coming your way. One is on data assistant in Molly's area, and Molly and Elaine will be championing that when we get to championing of decision packets. And I think you're all familiar with the background. There's a need to increase staffing within that group to handle those needs across all 5 of our schools. And then secondly, I will be coming to you with a need to replace the transportation vehicle that goes behind the buses as they go around town. It's now of a year in a condition that it's getting difficult to keep it on the road. I don't have those details yet, but it will be a new truck to replace the 1990-something truck we have.
Is that going to be a budget number, or is it going to be a?
Yes, it'll go into the budget and be.
You're going to pay for it all at once, cash
Yes.
on the barrelhead.
Yes, in my thinking, we're taking the bus payment out this year for the parking lot. We'll probably add a third of or a half of that back in to cover the bus, but.
So when local boards look at their baseline budgets, they should keep in the back of their mind that they're going to get some percentage of maybe $100,000 if these decision packets are both.
Correct. These would be adds to the baseline budgets after you as a board have decided they pass muster.
So, thanks. I know, we just wanted to have that number on our.
Okay.
radar.
That's your sequence beyond. As I said, we've inserted another review of special education. That's next, at your next meeting. And then you have 2 more meetings, the December 17th meeting and then a final adoption or preliminary adoption on January 7th.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, 5.1, reports to the board, Colt report.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take a minute from the Colt report to say that Bob Mason and I, along with Chris Hood, math teacher at CVU, and 2 CVU students, Emily Coffin and Greg Goldman, were invited to participate in the Vermont Business Roundtable Green Mountain Imperative Institute for the last 2 days. And that was 200 cross-cut section of Vermonters from the political, legislative, business, nonprofits, education, parent communities, students, administrators. And so went through this appreciative inquiry process. Different groups, they sorted us all out. And in the afternoon, this afternoon, we all had to, all 200 of us, come up with the 6 areas that we would commit to move forward, had to sign on the dotted line that we would stay for the entire 2 days, make sure we were there promptly at 7:30 yesterday and didn't leave till it was over. And we had to sign on these charts today our commitment to the area that we chose. So I thought you'd be interested in hearing, what are these 6 areas that all these people committed to focusing on? Student-centered learning. I will tell you that we all get to choose which tables we went to, and that those tables had a lot of kids at them. And that really revolved around implementation of PLPs, student voice, student engagement, and PLP starting in the elementary school, which we've been saying all along. Second one, new accountability system metrics. So testing, the high school students who were there said there is no skin in the game for a high school student for kneecap or SBACs or whatever, that we need to look at other things to see how well our kids are doing. And they think that the accountability system should be focused on continuous learning and growth, not on static points. Third was governance. Of the, let's see, there were 200 people there. This took up probably almost half of the people chose to go in tables of 10 to the governance. That was around efficient use of resources, ensuring that we attract great leaders and have continuity of leadership, community engagement for changes, encourage consolidation with incentives, have an opt-in model, clarifying roles and responsibilities, multi-year budgeting, single systems, pre-K-12 governance, from local control to local involvement. We heard that a lot, that we need to, shift that narrative. Streamlining governance, talking about a H883-like law, simplified model, pre-K-12, right sizing based on geography and size, and that relates to those of you who went to the regional meeting and saw Rebecca's slides, the slides that show here are the opportunities that you get in a school of 80 compared to a school of 300 in a high school, and that there really is no data to show that in small schools kids do better. And so that was another one. A third one was birth to 20 higher ed continuum. And that was a smaller group, but with they were talking about deliberately distributing investments based on needs to schools. The fifth, and I think this was the second largest group, sustainable funding system. So global budgeting, meaning all budgeting happens at the state, and distribution through community block grants based on enrollment and needs. Start with sustainable costs, increase income sensitivity rate, so that would increase the threshold at which you could get income sensitivity, which would have an immediate impact on tax rates. Impose staff-student ratios. People pretty much their jaws drop when they hear that there are schools in the state that have 6 kids in a class. And one of the learnings I had, I thought that like the 6 kids in a class were all in the very small schools, but there are schools, there is a school of 750 that has 4 first-grade classes with 9 kids in each class. I sat next to the person from that
Don't look at
community.
me.
No, it wasn't you, but I'm just saying, it is surprising, isn't it? You don't think that. We all have assumptions about what it looks like. Linking seniority to performance evaluation systems, cost effectiveness, statewide accountability for purchasing, teacher contracts statewide with some regional flexibility. At the state level, transportation services, again, imposed student-teacher ratios, minimum class sizes, fewer SUs, possibly 1. That was this one group. Incentives over mandates. And then there was the other challenges group. That was, again, a smaller group, and that was around poverty and economic development. And just talking about the alignment between education and human services, and how in education we have become human services providers. And so when people say, like, it costs more, you're asking us to do what used to be done by a whole other agency. So the need for educational stability for all of our students, food security for all of our students, and universal access to pre-K. So you can see it was, that's the roundup at, 2 o'clock.
Yep.
Anything you want to add?
I'd say, in case you've been out of state for 3 or 4 months, that be aware that this legislature will do something. And if we aren't engaged with the quality of the work they're going to do, it's shame on us. But the stage is set that it's a crisis and needs to be addressed in some significant way when they start in January. And then the second thing, what was interesting for me was that the governance track had like 4 tables, and so did the funding track. There was a remarkable similarity in all 4 presentations in governance, which I wouldn't have guessed a year ago. But we're disparate on how we think funding will be solved, which isn't too surprising.
And I would just end with, if you were there were plenty of opportunities for the 2 students, CVU students, to participate and speak, and they did, and I was hugely proud of them. Really, I was bursting with pride. And Chris Hood was on a teacher panel. There were 3 teachers, and I was extraordinarily proud to be his colleague. He did such a great job of sharing not only what he thinks about, cares about in education, but weaving in the professional development that, Molly, hats off to you, about math best practices and how that has changed education in his class. And it was great. I felt really proud of this SU.
Next steps?
Next steps, the company that they hired to do all the facilitation, this is the Vermont Business Roundtable, is going to gather all of the Post-it notes, there was a graphic designer there who, as we're having our conversations and we had to do skits, he's drawing, you've seen it on YouTube, he's drawing all of these little pictures so that we've got, like, at the end of the day, at the Doubletree, the whole room is papered with these, here are the ideas and here are the pictures that kind of encapsulate. It was great. So this group is going to gather all of this, summarize it, gather us in subgroups to work on focus areas, and come out with a plan in January. Here's the executive summary. And the Nellie Mae Foundation guy, just before I left, got up and said, as a person who was one of the major funders for this. He says there are a lot of times when, as a funder, we go to something that we've funded and we leave going, oh man, I wish I hadn't spent my money there. He said, this is not one of them. This has been an extraordinary 2 days. So it was great to hear that from...
He didn't write the check right at that moment, but it was good.
Yeah, he felt good about the process. So.
Will we be sharing this with all our boards? Will you guys?
I can write it up for the next
that'd be great.
report.
I have a question about what was written up in your health report
Yep.
under this Green Mountain Imperative.
That's what this is.
Right, number 1, equity. That phrase is not finished. Identifying the educational opportunities to which we want and then nothing is filled in there. What is it? Every student, every school, every...
Number 1.
I think it's every student have access to.
every student have
Has-
access to?
Have access. When we
Oh, here
talk
it is.
equity, we talk about uniform access
And
to.
for which, yeah,
For which
I don't know.
we,
I'll have to look
for
at that.
which we want every student to have access?
Yeah. We want for every student.
Same for each.
Thank you.
materials.
Can I pull you back to the kudos on the,
Yes,
on the
yeah.
Holt report, since we have people with us? Mike and Cindy?
Mike and Cindy, thank you very much.
Does everyone know Mike Nadeau? He's been coming recently, but has not been often at our meetings, so.
And Mike completed part 1 and part 2 of this international ASBO. This is a really quite an achievement. Only 40 nationally, right, have completed this. So we are very proud of you, Mike. And Cindy has earned her national certification as a senior professional in human resources. And we're really proud of you, too. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Any other questions on the Colt report?
Yeah, I have one, I guess, for Molly. I feel like I should know this, but as we're moving towards the transition and the standards-based grading, when is the middle school set to sort of get on board with that? I asked since it looks like the current 7th grade are the ones who get full implementation at 12th grade. And
Yeah, at the moment, that's going to come up at the next principals meeting to talk about when we can find time to do that work and pull a teacher team and all that goes along with it. So at the moment, I can't give you a decisive answer, but clearly, that's the next place we need to do that work.
Okay, 5.2, first quarter financial management report. Bob, thank you for taking a stab.
Ask, we're here to serve. We've inserted a new summary page for those who find the complexities of all the work that we do on page 2 and 3 to be too complex to grasp. We've taken each category of your budget, talked about the assessments that come in, the total revenues, including assessments, or revenues beyond just assessments, the expenditures, and then did a net line that would kind of give you the health of functional area by functional area. And my comments on the front page talk more to those differences to make sure you understand where we are health-wise in each area of the budget. So we'll continue doing this if that makes sense for all of you, and we'll continue commenting on differences on this page, not necessarily the layer of detail that Mike and I work with on page 2 and 3.
The PhD version.
So questions?
There's only 40 people in the whole country can understand the second page.
We do valuable work.
We have one or two.
One of them at the table,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
At least one.
Any questions on the FMR? Okay, we're on to discussion matters. 6.1 policy. Cindy?
Are there any questions?
Nicely done.
Not to be facetious, those two policies are pretty straightforward.
And nothing that people should be aware of as they go back to their boards for discussion?
I don't think so on those two now. The two more, two that warranted more discussion, that will clearly warrant more board discussion as well when they come to you.
Yes, Kath.
Title 16, education, page 2 of 3. Why is number 4 circled in asterisk? On that, the school shall provide for and the staff shall use needs-based.
Because what I've been doing this year is adding, if you look back to the legal reference, under the policy, that is the section that they cite.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on policy? Okay, 6.2, special ed paras. So what I'd like to do here with consent of the board is briefly review where we were on all this last week, and then ask each of the board chairs or someone from each of the local boards to share with the board any other discussion we had, because we had decided after this review that everyone would go back to the local boards and have a discussion on the subject and see if there were any new questions or comments. I am going to say that I absolutely am not going to put Molly off again this week, so we'll try to get this done in about 5 minutes, and then if we're not ready to move on, we're not deciding tonight, it's a discussion. 5-7 minutes, I'd like to table it, and we'll have more discussion if that's what it requires, okay? So there was a page in the Colt report, sort of reviewing the bidding, where we left off, I think, was the understanding that when the decision was made to leave the paras as local employees, there were a lot of assumptions that we made about the law which had changed since that time. For instance, having to, rather than, at the time we made that decision, we thought the funding for those paras would just stay at the school. And now we know that we have to bring it back into the common pool and send it out by ADM. That's the bigger change that I know happened, that we made. I also know at the time there was a lot of interest or a lot of discussion about the fact that paras are very local employees. That often the paras are at that school because their kids are at that school, they live in that town. They're not, and so we thought, well, that'd be better for them to be managed locally. So those were the two things that I kind of remember from my time on those discussions. So then we fast forward, or slow forward, a year and a half. And because of all the funding and because we've already moved the special education professionals, the proposal now is that it kind of doesn't make sense for this to be the one and only group of special education professionals who are not at the SU, and that they should be hired. It's really the hiring situation, right?
It's the contract itself.
Right, bring the contract to the SU, move everything to the SU in total. I don't, so Elaine had brought us through a couple of issues that she had talked over with the support staff. A lot of concern about being forced to move to change schools, and we had that discussion. I can't remember what your...
That's in negotiations and would be one way or the other, but we have no reason to believe that we wouldn't reach agreement with them about this. We agree that paraeducators, many of them, most of them, are working in the schools they're working in because they live in that community, their kids are in that school, and that's where they want to work. So if they want to keep their employment at the local school by contract, by negotiated agreement, we're fine with that. We're not thinking that this changes any of that, and we're willing to put that in the negotiated agreement. This really is about who signs the contract.
Right.
Is it you and me, or is it Keith and me, and Kevin and me?
And the kind of the two other things that I know were issues were that the local administration wanted the flexibility to, because not all of our special education paras are 100%, that they wanted the flexibility, and that shouldn't be a problem as long as they're correctly charged as special education or not special education. If the local administrator feels that that's the right thing to do for the students in the school, that's not an issue. And then I know that there was an issue around maybe some local concern that the SU board, as we get into our budget issues and our budget pressures, we may make decisions about how special education paras are used in local schools. And frankly, that's going to happen whether these folks are local or not, because those decisions are all going to be made at the SU level. Special education, those decisions are going to be made at the SU level. So those are the ones that I was aware of before, and now I'd want to hear if there were other issues or if I'm misrepresenting something. Are you speaking for your board? Do you have a question?
I'm not speaking for my board because I'm not the board chair. I wasn't at the board chair's meeting, and I'd be interested in Keith's thoughts.
Not the board chair's meeting. This was I was asking for feedback on the local meetings.
No, I'm just comment and a question. I seem to remember that there was discussion a year or two ago, and it all turns into a blur. But when we were looking at the numbers initially, there were significant differences in how paras were used in the different buildings. And for transitioning to the SU for paras would mean a hit for some budgets quite significantly. And there was discussion about whether or not it was feasible to do a multi-year transition into it, and I don't know what that discussion has been, and
Can I just give it a shot, because I think, Bob, I'm
Russ
going to
and
ask
Kevin
Bob.
were part of that discussion, and I don't,
But I don't know that that would change based on who does the hiring for those folks, right?
it doesn't matter who does the hiring. I think it's the service plan and how paras are used in different buildings. So we can't say that it's still in local control to use paras and hire or however they want, and then say that, no, it's the SU. So it's either one or the other.
Okay. So regardless of where the check gets written, though, it's the SU board that determines, has all the conversations about the budget. In my mind, in my way of thinking, and I've had this conversation with the administrators who are nervous about this too.
Right.
The SU board's responsibility is to look at the data and see how much is it costing, and we said we would do this in the springtime, per pupil, taking out the extraordinary costs. What's it costing per pupil to provide services for special ed in each of our local schools? And then if there's an outlier, to ask the question, why is that?
Mm-hmm.
And now that's the legitimate role of the board to say, something's not right here. If it turns out that the per pupil cost is the same across, then I don't think it's the legitimate role of the board to say, well, how come they have more paras? Well, maybe you've got more something else. That is how they plan their provision of services, and that is all about Megan at the SU looking at this, making sure that we're providing best practice accommodations, that the interventions are all best practice, but as long as the per pupil is right-sized.
Yeah, and so just to exaggerate where I see potential challenges, I don't want me as a board member in Heinsberg influencing Williston's decisions about how they use paras. I want me as a board member of the CSSU board to ask administrators to do whatever they need to do for administration and oversight and making sure kids are taken care of. But I don't want to dip my toes in the water of having direction in another building.
Right.
Right.
Right, I agree. I think that's what I was trying to say.
But at the same time, you're wearing two different hats,
Right.
Colleen.
Right.
And so,
Right.
you don't have that right or obligation or role as a Heinsberg board member, but you do have some right and obligation and role as a SU board member now as it relates to special ed because of the changes moving everything to this SU's jurisdiction.
Right. This is where it gets tricky, I think.
So, Elaine, when you said that at some point, and I missed when you said that was, you'll look at per pupil costs. When do you anticipate that happening? Because based on, this sheet of Megan's here, there are huge disparities in staffing levels relative to student body population. And I recognize you've got small populations and you could have different special ed populations in the schools, but the disparities are very big.
We penciled in for the spring, right?
We did pencil it in for the spring, and it would be every spring we would do that. Just didn't seem like something that we could do in the middle of the
But so
budget
for this
season right
coming
now.
budget year, we're sort of stuck with where
I
we
mean,
are.
I don't know if we have other numbers that we could pull out to just give a sort of, good enough number just to kind of, but I don't know that.
Josh.
And I think there are impacts beyond special ed. I know for Williston in particular, we have, it's at least my understanding, tolerated larger class sizes because we were more liberal historically in the use of paras. And so it seems to me there's going to be cause and effect that's going to have reverberations.
I don't think that your class sizes are higher than anybody else's anymore. There was a time when that probably was true, but every single one of our schools has class sizes pretty much the same. It varies from one grade level to another in every school, but in our middle schools, every single middle school has at least one grade level that has 26, 27 in a grade. That is standard. I don't think it's out.
And comment, wouldn't those paras be
And
non-special ed?
they're
then we
non-special
would
ed, and you
have
can do that. That just affects you. It does not affect.
So we still retain discretion.
This is just for the special ed paras.
So can I ask if, just to go around the board chairs and say, was there anything that came out of discussions last month that is sort of new thoughts or concerns from your boards that we ought to be taking into account? Want to start, Susan?
Nothing yet from the CBD board.
Nothing, Charlotte.
Nothing, Charlotte?
Nothing from Sheldon.
Nope. Wilson?
I wasn't present last month. I'm going to defer to Deb and Josh on this.
Deb and Josh, you got, was there?
I don't think there was anything that wasn't covered by the summary of the subjects.
Thank you.
Spencer?
Nothing that I recall is, being questioned or noteworthy than, essentially a difference to this board.
And we essentially left this meeting with no information and went to our local boards with no information, so hard to have a...
No information? What information?
I mean, like
The action
comparing
you're-
budgets and so forth.
But the action you're taking doesn't change the budget.
Right.
Yeah.
The action you're taking is only about who signs the contract and then who issues the check. The budget changes not by a penny.
Yeah. I'm totally in support of
Yeah.
having it at the SU level. I just want to acknowledge that I know that for some districts, there may be a sense of discomfort.
Right. But it won't change. That's the thing.
So with 2 minutes, I just need a sense of, is there more information that people will need before we vote on this? Whenever we vote on this? Or are people,
Well, May Fletcher now.
get Bob Troublemaker back there?
Early, and I just said, you know what?
Looking at the information that was provided tonight about the way special ed charges will get allocated.
Yeah.
It's been my understanding that approximately half of special ed expenditures get returned to us in the form of revenue, be it IDEA or state or whatever. What I saw up there in that spreadsheet, it only amounted to about 3.5%.
It's interesting.
Where is the revenue coming back to us, to the
Okay,
SU?
Bob, I'm gonna have you hold this thought because the topic that we're on now has no budget implications at all. Okay? So without hearing anything else, we just need to pencil this in. I don't know, we don't actually have another meeting until February, right?
Right.
So in which case you might have lots more questions. But as of right now, unless I hear otherwise, I think we've talked this decision around. I think everybody knows the pros and cons and we're just gonna need to vote on it as SU board. It's an SU board decision, okay? Great, thank you very much. We have one item on the action matters. Can I have a motion to approve the regular minutes of 10/21/14? Is that Kristen?
Yes.
Have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kevin. Susan, you said.
Actually.
I don't have it in front of me. Just go ahead, I don't have it in front of me. It's just, Susan was it was a typo in the minute.
Had the wrong Susan.
The wrong Susan on the leadership committee. Thank you. Anything else on the minutes? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which is 8.2 and 8.3? Kristen, thank you, Kristen.
Second.
Thank you, Kevin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? You guys have it. I'd like to confirm next meeting dates, and we got a lot of budget meetings in December, so make sure you've got them on your calendar, please. And the time, because we're starting at 5:30. And with that, Molly, I'm 2 minutes late. First, I do honestly and sincerely, I have to apologize to Molly for our mess up last month. Elaine and I are working hard to figure out how to balance the time, the needs of a large board with the professional respect that we owe to our staff. And she not only did she prepare a great presentation that we didn't give her time to give, but it was her birthday. And she didn't go out to dinner so that she could come and present to us, so 39 again. But anyways, thank you, Molly. Now, again, I apologize.
This year for the first time in the 13 years I moved to Vermont. That's why we live here. That's why we tolerate winter.
So Molly, you might need to give us a refresher on where we left off. Previously on...
Previously on.
$30 Thursdays at Cornell and Stowe last year. I should have had like first Monday of every month. I'm pretty sure you get a $50 ticket. So I'm just gonna, I have no longer time to kids activities.
Coffee. That's what I know. I'm glad I was like.
Well, hi again. Wasn't that long ago, except in some ways it was, because this is the mighty chocolate presentation. You heard the beginnings, and then we stopped, and now you're going to have the middle, and I think I should go back because the introduction really had a lot to do with the data that I'll show you. So to keep it short, however, I'm not going to go through every slide that I did last time, right, Jean? But all right. But I will take you back a little bit just to bring you back to the world of indicators. And what I talked to you about in the very beginning last time was the fact that recently many of us at the central office have had the great opportunity to be in meetings with the Secretary of Education, Rebecca Holcomb, who is adamant, strident even, about her views on assessment. And so I will start with some of her words, which are among some that I shared with you, that we must be sure we use test results in the right way and make sure that we're using the right data to demonstrate what indeed we're trying to show. So I say that because this work is a work in progress, and I think I was really clear about that last time. In fact, we're in construction, I would say, with our indicators, and we've learned a whole lot as we've done this work. So I humbly come to you, I feel like, as I did last month, with a draft, but a working draft, and it will indicate a whole lot of new learning about indicators and what assessments exactly make a good indicator and which do not. So, with that in mind, and I am going to fly through, okay. Anything I should know about this clicker?
Work for us.
Oh, so I'm going to go back and forth a little? Darn. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to? Okay. All right. Great. So every once in a while I'm going to skip slides and I'll tell you when. So anyway, last time I went through a whole lot of things to give you some background so that the world of indicators would make sense in the big world of data and assessments. And I won't review all of that, but I do want to bring you back to a couple things that will help frame this work. One is, I'm usually in front of you, and I'm sure I will be again, giving you big sets of data, our science data that comes in, our math, our reading. And they're big sets, and they get disaggregated, and I look at them around students in poverty and students on IEPs, and we mash over them together. So that's what you're acquainted with when I'm talking to you about data, and this is absolutely not that. So this is new territory for me and new territory for you. This is a very small data set. And in fact, this being the first year to report out on indicators, you're going to have last spring's first report out on each of those indicators. So this won't be a comparative description of what's going on until we build this data set. So that's the very first thing to understand. So more, you're here to get information about what in the future will be reported on year after year after year, and why. Okay, so what I'd like to do, you can skip this one, is just come back a little bit to formative and summative assessment. And short of all the things I told you about this last time, remind you that we're living in the summative world for indicators, by and large. That formative assessment is all about what goes on in a daily way, a weekly way in the classroom, where teachers are readily getting information about what's going on that will help fuel their differentiation to meet highs and lows and everything in between. But this is the world for indicators, and we very quickly discovered that as we tried to use some of our formative assessments, and they just don't work. They change regularly. They're reliable within a classroom, but across the whole SU, because they've been developed sometimes on the spot, they do not make a great piece of evidence for indicators. So we're going to live in the summative world. Okay, great. This simply tells you about a large body of work that we've undertaken since 2009 to build a collection of common formative assessments that we use across our K-8 schools, which have benchmark times during the year in which they're entered into VCAT and are used locally for data teams to then examine what's going on with various populations and what's going on in their schools. And originally, we thought we'd use a lot of this data for indicators, and it doesn't work. Okay, we can move on to the next. Last month, I talked to you a lot about VCAT and how we use VCAT and how critical it is to our culture of data and reviewing it. So I'll just depend on you to remember that. All right, we can go on to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the indicators themselves. And you might remember that I talked about how indicators tell a story. They should tell a story about the health of our organization. And they should be the way we measure the outcomes that you carefully have set aside. So that's the purpose. And so then what are they? And here's the critical learning for us as we develop this, which is that indicators that are working are a snatch of student performance at a time. It's a pulse at the very same time every year. So we'll basically be using spring data, and we will use the same, and I'll talk to you about what some of those are, like second grade reading. We're going to use that every year from the very same test at the very same time to make this reliable data. And you'll gradually build a data set that can talk about trends and how we're doing. Okay. Okay, so you are certainly familiar with your own outcomes, but here they are just in case you haven't reviewed this document since last month. And you broke your outcomes into 3 categories. They are meaty, they're really great. We're working on academic rigor tonight, and that's been the bulk of our focus. And we will be entering into civic and social responsibility and then transferable. This is a lot harder for us to gather data on, as you can imagine. Like, what tools are we going to use? We're going to invent some, I think. Surveys and things like that. So we're here tonight, and that's the work we've been doing. Okay, we're going to skip the next couple slides, and we're going to end up with, there you are. So we're going to dig into the data and start here. Okay, and I want to say before we start looking at the various indicators, again, this is our very first set of data. So you're going to see one point in time, and then every year we'll replicate that. We will probably make a couple tweaks because of things we've learned even since this, and I'll tell you about them as we go. I do want to talk to you a little bit about developmental benchmarks, let's call them, in a student's career in school, K-12. Research will tell you that there are places along the continuum of learning that are pivotal in a student's learning career, that are predictors or indicators of future success. Those, as it turns out, as we did our homework, make those times in a student's life make very good indicators. So I'm going to point those out. Some of these are very strong and some not as strong because we know that they're pivotal points for a student in their process of going through school. I call them gateway indicators. So this is one. The research will tell you that the success or lack thereof that a student has at the end of second grade in reading is a predictor of future success in high school, graduation rate, and even toward college. So this is a very essential indicator. We will look at this from now till you decide your outcomes are different. Really important gateway piece. This is an assessment tool that is founded in research by 2 very famous literacy experts, Fontes and Pinnell. And it is an assessment we've been using well for 3 years. It took a while to implement because it has about 5 parts to it that literally tests the elements of reading. It isn't just about fluency, it's about phonics, it's about comprehension, it's about depth of knowledge. So there are elements, and it took a while to implement. At any rate, for this past spring's second grade, 84% of our students in second grade tested quite well. 84% were proficient and above. All right, we're going to go on to looking at reading at a couple of other places along the continuum of learning for kiddos in 8th grade and 11th. And I'll point out that we're going to use 8th and 11th grade for the same reasons I talked to you about second. Those tend to be pivotal places, particularly of transition for students as they go through school. So you want to know when they leave 8th grade and they've had their K-8 career, how they're leaving, and that is often a predictor of their future work in high school and success. Same thing 11th or 12th. 12th, there's some mention in the research about how that's a challenging place to fuel your indicator information, because sometimes 12th graders by spring are kind of, I'm in college, I'm all set. So, and we want this, we want this to be really good work. We want this to be valid. So we're thinking at the moment that we're going to stick with spring of 11th grade and see how that works. So at the moment, based on NECAP, and of course next year it'll be SBAC, we have 86% of our 8th graders proficient and above in reading, and at 11th grade, 82%. In writing, so I'll talk to you about this one because this is one that we're not quite sure about. Initially, we're very excited to have an indicator that was very authentic in nature. You know, as we move into exploration of other ways to assess student performance, like project work and portfolios and performances and things like that, we want to see if we can cull some of that data. It's really hard to get when those kids are scored on a rubric. So it's tricky to do, but I would like to see some authentic pieces as we build our indicator set. So we were all excited about the grad challenge paper, and we talked to Jeff about it, and we're, oh good, we have a real piece of writing and the kids really care about it and it's authentic and it's for a purpose. And we thought, okay, so we should use their very first copy because it's not yet gone through a conferencing iteration with a teacher, and we don't want that influence. Let's see what the raw writing looks like. So here it is, 61% proficient and above, but as we talked about it, we realized that students going through this process, many of you with high schoolers know this, they know their first draft is going to go through 5 iterations. So this isn't a great example of their very best writing. So I want to figure out something else for this, but tell you that we're searching for the right indicator here. We could fall back on NECAP for writing. And SBAC is going to have a really vigorous writing section. So we might end up there while we look for something more authentic. So right now, I think we need that pivotal time of 8th grade, that transition to high school. So this is the NECAP at 8th grade. 75% of our students are proficient and above. Be interesting to track this. Now, of course, we're going to have this spring's data, right, NECAP. Next year, we'll have a second set of data to put beside it, and it'll be SBAC. So that's a little bit orange and apples, but that's the time that we're in. So we'll watch that. So another really pivotal thing, now we're going to move into math, is of course fact fluency. When I first started in this job, 2009, we designed our own fact fluency assessment that we've been using ever since, only it's changed at least 3 times that I can think of. But to talk to you about this, we will keep some kind of fact fluency indicator because, again, this is in research. Students who have automaticity with their facts are more apt to go to higher level math, and it's more easily sought for them because they're not challenged by just the automatic rote understanding of the facts. So it's a really important piece for us to follow. and to work toward and encourage with our teachers. So at the moment, we have results at second grade in adding and subtraction. This again is proficient and above. And we have multiplication and division. So I want you to know that the Common Core is, as you know, really changing our pacing, our curriculum, and our rigor. At this point, which hasn't been before, all fourth graders are to have automaticity in both multiplication and division. That has never been the case before, and that's a very tall order, and we have to work hard at it, and we're not there. Likewise, in second grade, proficient in addition and subtraction. Subtraction's always the bugaboo, and we clearly are going to have to work on that. So this is last spring's data, and I think it's interesting because these students haven't yet been through a whole program that was both Common Core aligned and also a new program that has many more places for them to practice. So it'll be interesting to watch as we grow this data set. A really important one for us to pay attention to. So fifth grade math we have here, 77% of our students are proficient and above on the kneecap math. And I believe we have the next set. Great, thanks. So here's another gateway. I call this another pivotal measure. We're going to really follow this. The research right now tells us about student success in algebra being an indicator about what they choose to pursue in math in high school, and that it's a gateway, that it opens the path. So this is our last spring data on our 8th graders who completed Algebra 1, 52% of them did. I threw in last year's kiddos, the year before, I should say, in the spring, and that was 43%. And this will be a great thing for us to track. As you know, our CMP program is fairly new. We bought the 3rd edition because it's aligned to the Common Core and because it is also sold as an Algebra 1 program. So it's middle level, deep, rich middle level math with algebra woven in. And it's going to be interesting that it hasn't been implemented for this data. So it'll be very interesting to watch what happens over time. Okay. This is a 12th grade indicator. The research is pretty clear also about the importance of graduates from high school having had Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, minimum, and how critical that is to math success in college. I mean, that it's just a basic thing now. So we're going to track that. We're going to follow the number of students who successfully complete. Right now, 76% as of last spring. And we will also look at science kneecap. So I used this year, and then we'll build our data set from there. This was an interesting year, and again, this isn't the comprehensive assessment review for you of science kneecap, but just in short, I want you to know that the whole state fell 3.6%, and so did we, and so did everybody else. And it's important to know that the science kneecap test has changed every year. They take out questions and they put in questions, and as they do that, they are gradually tilting toward a more NGSS-based set of questions. Next Gen Science is what I'm using that acronym, I'm sorry, which are, not unlike the Common Core, much more rigorous. So as they do that, and we haven't implemented NGSS yet, you'll see what goes on over the next couple years. Eventually, the kneecap science will be replaced with an aligned exam with the NGSS. So that said, about the dip in scores across the state, CSSU continues to exceed the state by quite a lot, 22% for 4th and 11th grade, and by 26% for 8th grade. All right. So this part, these last slides, really focus on your outcome, the wording in your outcome about academic rigor, referencing our students reaching their highest potential. And so when we sat to really think about this many times, we thought about looking at our courses that offer a stretch, and how many students participate and how do they do. So these next few slides are about that, and we will track this as we go along. So here you have juniors and seniors completing AP Math and Science. And I have to say, this will be our data that we'll have for the future, because this is the year that we're collecting on. But I added these because I was curious. I haven't ever looked at this before. So I was interested in looking at what is actually a very nice trend line there, you know, a 4% increase in students' performance. So nice to see.
Can you explain that?
I'm sorry?
40%. Could you
This
explain what
is-
the numbers are?
Yeah, this is 40% of students who complete AP Math and Science proficient and above in 2013-14.
Oh, so-
And that was out of 636 kids.
So it's not like the same 20% took math and,
No, not necessarily. We looked at both of them and, right.
but
So there
it's
could
not
be
like the-
overlap, that's correct, yes. Yeah. Do the next one. This one looks at students taking 4 years of math, 4 years of science. So we looked at students in grade 12 only who had done 4 years. 72% of grade 12 last year were taking their 4 years of math, and 60% of our students were taking 4 years of science. It'll be nice to see that, see what happens to that over time. Our hope, of course, is that students are gradually thinking about taking more AP as they feel ready, more AP courses and more involved in full 4 years of math and science.
So Molly, are those numbers representing students who have taken the course or who have taken the course and are proficient or above?
No, these aren't proficient and above. This
Okay.
is numbers of kids
Okay,
who
that
have
registered and
successfully
taken the
completed.
courses. Okay.
You're right. Yep. Yep. Good question. So we did the same thing, thanks, with world language to see, so how are we doing with students who are working on the higher level language areas? And we had to look at quite a few things. It's not as simple as AP, because there's only AP French, but there's French 4, French 5, AP French, Spanish 4, Spanish 5, Latin 4. So we looked at all of those to see how students were doing. These are juniors and seniors taking advanced level world language. And I included some extra data, but going forth, we'll have 2013-14 and then whatever we build on. But I was just curious what that looks like. That basically is pretty static, pretty much the same. 34 to 36% of our juniors and seniors are taking a higher level in world language. Just a blurb about SATs and, in fact, AP courses. And you may have read the same New York Times article that I did about this, but David Coleman was a writer for the Common Core. He's now been hired by SAT. And he's in the process of basically transforming the SAT and the AP exams to be more representative of what we expect for students who go through a Common Core, more rigorous curriculum. So these tests are going to morph starting this spring, and it'll be very interesting for us to see what happens. It'll be one more indicator for us. So where's our work going to have to be around the Common Core? Where do we have holes? But at any rate, right now, for our 11th graders last spring, you can see, the total score is 800, and this is the percentage grade 11 participating. So 63% participated, and this is the average score in math, writing, and reading. And the next slide is the ACT. Fewer of our kiddos participate in the ACT. There are 25% of 11th graders involved here, and these are average scores, the highest being a 36. Okay. I talked you through this last time, and I think we can skip that slide if you don't mind. Basically, that tells you that we've learned a whole lot as we've built this set of data that now, going forth, you will see every year. we're going to change that writing one that I talked to you about. And the conclusion is the same, but I want to give it to you again because it's really important. And that is that our work with indicators coincides with a transition from old standards to new, old curricula to new, old teacher-designed units to Common Core aligned units, old assessments to a gradual replacement to those that are better aligned with what our expectations are. So all of these shifts are increasing depth and rigor, and it just so happens that we're working on indicators that will demonstrate how we're doing with that increase of depth and rigor. We're in the midst of a rapidly changing national, state, and local landscape when it comes to assessment and when it comes to curriculum. And it's a very exciting time. It's a bit overwhelming at times, but it's a very exciting time. And I end with, in case you can't tell, I'm really enthusiastic about looking at data. And we now in CSSU proudly can say that we are very much a culture of data users. Our teachers increasingly use it, and certainly all of us do. And it's one driver, certainly not the only one, but it's a pretty big driver that helps us know how are we doing, what's the pulse, and it does provide us with some direction at times, all tempered with a healthy, how much weight should we put on this test versus another, which we have to be careful about, and I think about Rebecca Holcomb's words. So, yes, questions?
This may not be a fair question for you, and that's fine to say it's not, but it brings to mind when you discuss SAT and how those are, the SAT tests are going to be changed to be more in line with what is going to be taught in the Common Core. So if our students are going to be taking the SATs, and those are dependent upon what is being taught in the Common Core, how are we, in relation to the rest of the nation, kind of lining up with what other people are teaching with the Common Core, and how are we going to predict how our students are going to do on the SAT then? How are they going to be prepared for the SAT?
Well, I can answer some of that. How we stack up nationally right at this very moment, I can't tell you, but I'll know when we get our SBACs back, because that is now the national exam aligned with the Common Core. But I can tell you that for 3 years we've been working on Common Core awareness, number one, education for everybody, professional development, and now this year implementation. And in that work, teachers during in-service have been given time to build new units, to build new formative assessments, to evaluate how their kids are doing daily, and generally to get very familiar and accustomed to what the expectations, let's take fact fluency, are at their grade level and adjust their curricula. Literally to the point of taking what they used to do and taking things out and putting things in, literally. So I guess I feel, I'm scared to say this, but I know you well enough to just say it. In some ways, I think we're really well poised because we have done a tremendous amount of work, K-12, on the Common Core. But 3 years, really, when you think of the depth and richness and the size of the Common Core and all there is there, 3 years is a drop in the bucket. Usually implementation of something new and vast is about 8 years. So when I think of that, I say I don't know how we're going to measure up nationally, but we sure will find out. And the SBAC is going to be a terrific indicator for us about how we're doing. Are there areas that we have a great big hole, we best get to work, or we're really doing well? So I think that'll be our test right there.
Does that address SATs? The question is going to be interesting if higher ed starts taking the SBACs as their national test. Why do you need to take the SATs? That will be really interesting dynamic, which is, I'm sure, why the SATs hired the guy from the Common Core to.
Yeah. Is that on memorizing?
There's a conversation going on about it. I don't know where.
It's got to be a higher ed decision, right?
I would say it was a bigger conversation 2 years ago when it looked like every state in the country, except for 2, was going to be either doing SBAC or PARC. Now that there are states that are pulling out of the assessment part of it, it makes it less of a national thing, but who knows how that'll play out in the next 2 years.
Right, yep. Yep. Does that help? Yes, Kathy? Okay. Any other questions, comments?
It's a very impressive body of work that you've put together. I mean, I have a great appreciation for how even one little slide, one set of numbers can take huge amounts of time. So thank you so much for this work. It's really illuminating about all the work we're doing. We talked about this in the committee, and I think it might be worth bringing up again. It's two questions, but it's related. One is, how do we know what's good and what's acceptable? So if we say 86% reading at proficient, at a proficient level in grade 8, is that acceptable to us? How do we know that? And then what do you do with the data? And tell us about the processes about what a particular data set means. You get the data back, and then what happens?
Can I take that as a first shot? Well, it's just because I was kind of going there, seen this presentation. Molly and Megan and I have sat around the table and looked over this stuff so many times, but just tonight when I was listening to it, I was trying to figure, okay, well, wait a minute, what is that 86%? Yeah. And that means that in 8th grade, we have probably about 300 kids. And 86% means that we've got 42 kids across the whole SU that need something else. They need an intervention, and then I think about the multi-tiered system of supports and how we're poised to do that work. And I think if you take each one of those and you stop and think of it that way, here is at grade, I think it was grade 3, 84% of our students. Oh no, that was probably the second grade one, 84%.
And be careful, some of those percentages are the number of students proficient and above.
That's what I'm talking about. 84% proficient and above in second grade in reading means that 48 of our incoming third grade students need something. And that's across the SU. We can write their names down. We can say, what are we doing for those individual kids? So that's how I see that works. And that's why having fewer of these indicators so that we really can focus on them and know that we've got work to do is.
And to answer more, I appreciate that answer. And in addition, I think about what goes on in our data teams in our buildings when you said, so what does happen with the data and how is it used? And so they're taking results, particularly NECAP, BAS, some things in math, and they are literally looking at all of the incorrect answers and figuring out, were these simple test-taking errors, which you can kind of tell if someone just grabbed letter A on a multiple choice and it just happened to look like the right answer but wasn't. Or is there truly a misconception? And if so, how many are misconceptions? That is the level of disaggregating and munching and crunching our teachers do, either with their math or literacy coordinator or depending on how it's done. Each year we do it a little differently, but in their data team, to figure out what are the holes, where are the deficiencies, and who are those children. Naturally, I can't share that here, but literally child by child. Sometimes there are kiddos that are cuspy, they're just barely, they're hovering just below proficient or just above, and we're just as worried if they're just a hair above. Those kiddos are talked about one at a time. And what do they need? What services do they get now? Should it happen in the classroom? Should there be something else? So there's a tremendous amount of using data going on. I don't know if that helps to answer, but.
Yeah, I was setting you up for that response.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Thank you, Kelly.
But the other thing I want to say is, one thing around our indicators is, obviously we're looking for progress, right? And so over time, as we have this data from the very same point in the year, and the same grades, we want to see what happens, and if we don't, that's information. That's great information for us to use. Yes, Susan.
So how do you then look at like the percentage of kids who are taking AP courses?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a number that you would also hope to see grow, and then how does that tie into the number of courses that we're actually offering? And
I think all of that is for us to munch and crunch over. This data then is talked about at the leadership level, and conversations are had. Are we offering enough of them? If that's stagnant, which I don't know yet, but if so, what can we do? What efforts can be made to help invite students to both be ready for those and then also to participate?
I mean, are you tracking how many kids would like to take them and can't take them right now?
I don't know if we have that data. I'd have to find out. That's a great question. That would be part of the, let's look at what's going on here. We're stagnant if we are, and what could the reasons be? And then I think we'd propose questions to answer. That'd be one of them.
Will you start to be tracking as an indicator the number of kids that are taking college classes as well?
That's a great one actually to do. Yeah.
I think these kind of questions are going to get more complicated as we get out of the relatively easy academic standards and we start moving into the other ones too. I think Eric had a question.
True.
Yeah, it's kind of along these lines. I mean, you mentioned how, sort of the baseline that we're measuring towards is proficiency, and there's a huge array of resources to bring people up to that level, and every single kid by name who needs to access those resources. Other side of the coin, for our goal is for everyone to reach their full potential. So for the kids who are able to achieve at a higher level, what's the culture around promoting excellence? What are the measures? Or even if it's not a data point, what's the culture like about promoting excellence? And is that same level of attention being provided?
I know that's often doubted because we tend to talk about those students who need something so that they can join the pool of proficient and above. And so by having that be a focus of conversation, it feels like we've left these other kids out, but we haven't. And certainly as our teachers work with differentiation, and that's like one of our primary efforts right now is to help all teachers understand how to differentiate to meet every spectrum in that classroom, which is often very wide. And as we do that, it's the spectrum here and it's the spectrum here and everything in between. And those kids absolutely are just as much a focus and should be. Twiddling your thumbs in class isn't an option.
I'm not sure what, again, you're the sort of the data maven, but if performance did conform to some sort of normal shaped distribution, you'd have an expectation for how many kids in a given population would be, above whatever the top, proficient with distinction. And then, did our numbers fall within the expectation?
Yeah, I hope we exceed the expectation.
Or exceed,
I can't stand the bell curve. I think it just locks us right into, here's average and we're going to point ourselves there.
No, but I'm saying you'd know that, 5% of the kids would be in that last, standard deviation off the charts in one way or the other, right? So if you only have a couple kids in proficient with distinction, you'd know that maybe that wasn't the expected amount. It should have been 10 or 20 or...
That we would wish to see that grow. And we do. I mean, I think that tends to be, of course, right now anyway, in our world in education, that tends to be a smaller percentage of the kids, but what we look for and the way the kneecap comes back to us is we can look at that percentage specifically. I've glommed proficient and above together so that we could look at the bar and watch it change over time. Maybe I should think about that differently, but on the kneecap, we really take a look at is our group, and we've talked about it here, in that exceeding proficiency realm, is that growing? Why isn't it? What's going on there? So it's certainly a focus for us. And I want it to exceed whatever the percentages are around the country of those kids, and I want it to be more than that.
Eric, I think those are exactly the kind of questions that we're trying to get from the board, because remember, and I might be repeating what you started out with, Molly, but the board manages outcomes. And we delegate the curriculum to the professionals, but they do have to meet the outcomes that the board has set. And so what we're talking about now is this first pass at Molly and Elaine saying, see, we met or didn't meet your outcomes. And we say, well, that's not what I meant by outcomes. So for instance, and I don't think this is what Molly's saying, but if we said excellence and Molly interprets that as, doesn't fail, then that would be our position to say, that's not what I meant by excellence. And we feed back to say, we're looking for something that shows exception. And so that's exactly the kind of conversation we're going to have over the years as we get better at this. Did Kathy have her hand up before someone over here had their hand up? Okay, sorry. Go ahead,
Would
Colleen.
you like to go before me?
Just to tag on to that, I'm sorry.
I guess that
It's
was, yes,
related.
go ahead, yes.
But I think there's another piece of it in that if we as a board say 84% of eighth graders is not enough for proficient reading, and, you know, the data we get these indicators, and Molly says, well, to do that, to get those other 48 kids or whatever, we really need to have some programs to be able to do this. Then it's going to come back to us, as it might be a budget implication.
Right.
So if we say, if we have an outcome expectation as a board, we want all kids to succeed, whatever that means, but, you know, 90% is what we want to go for. Let's say it's whatever. Then our administrators are going to come back to us and say, okay, we can do it, and this is what it would require to do, and we have to support that. We don't have to, but it would be a consideration.
That's a good point. Now, Kathy.
Thank you,
So
Kathy.
maybe this
I'm
is
sorry.
related to, no, that's good. Maybe this is related to that. When I hear that second grade reading testing is kind of a drop-off point, that at second grade, if they do not test at that certain level, it's an indicator of, let's put it in the reverse, that they will do poorly after that. And eighth grade, if kids do not test at that level, then they will do poorly after that. So what do we do that's preemptive to that? What do we do, what kind of testing do we do to get those kids beforehand and get them so in both instances?
Scans of things.
Okay.
You know, too long a list, but I don't want to not answer your question, but all kinds of things, because all the research is about the earlier we get to those students who suffer from weak vocabulary in their homes and arrive at our schools, right away they're in a setback. So immediately there are things in place. That's why pre-K is so essential. So, and our whole MTSS emphasis is about merging what goes on in the classroom that needs replicating and integrating with what goes on for intervention for students and tightening up that linkage. And, you know, and of course our emphasis on differentiating right in the classroom. But that really just scratches the surface of what we are doing around those kiddos who come to Kid Talks, not the children themselves, but their data, and are discussed, and plans are made, and the teacher goes back, and things are tried. They come back to another meeting, and these kiddos' names come up quite a bit as administration and teachers meet to solve just exactly that. And the earlier we do it, the better. So many of our schools are placing a whole lot of resources early on, and that's a really good thing.
Jean, so what are the next steps for getting back to what you were saying, to where the board can provide input into thinking about now the indicators as it relates to the outcomes that we've established? Like how is that conversation intentional in the future?
So we had planned for that to be on the agenda last month, right? It's on our agenda, our CVU's agenda, right? So I think we have to kind of regroup on that. I know we did have some discussion around at the committee, and I see Marilyn's here too, if you want to chime in, Marilyn, around it's one thing if it's 86%, kind of hard to argue. It could be 90, but some of our numbers are not that good. Right. So, but you can't just say 46% proficient's not good enough. We want it to be 70. As one of the principals at the table said, it's like no child left behind all over again. You know, give me an impossible task. And so that kind of discussion would have to happen with administration and through the action plan. So I don't know that I have a good answer. I would probably recommend that boards get comfortable with the indicators that we're talking about for their grade levels, and maybe we'll feed back to figure out how we need to regroup on moving forward with it. It's, I don't know, does anybody have on the committee or anyone else have a?
We talked about that it possibly be a retreat agenda item.
So this is not a standing committee. This was a committee that did this work?
It was a committee to talk about outcomes and indicators, and then we just sort of disbanded it because that work we were done with, and so now we have to think about as a board how to go forward from there.
I do want to be really sure about the data there, that some of that data is about numbers of students who are proficient and above, and some of that data is percentage of students participating, because those were higher level courses, and we want to track that because it's an indicator. But I just want to be sure when you do review these, that it's two different kinds of information.
And where are we on the other on the other outcomes, the other sets of outcomes?
So we have drafts of what it might look like. I have been going around to each of the schools and meeting with the program councils. I will tell you that people sit up a little straighter when they know that these have already been shared with, the academic rigor indicators have been shared with the board. Now people are paying more attention. So I've gone around to all of the program council and solicited input from the
Could you slip back to
group.
that first slide, or whatever one the indicators are on, just people can remember what they are?
As Jean said, once you get into civic and social responsibility and transferable skills, it's a lot harder to figure out what to do. It probably will involve some kind of survey. The good news is that others are beginning to talk about this. When Rebecca Holcomb talks about balanced accountability, she is talking about, she doesn't use the same exact words, but she's talking about all of these categories. And so that means that there will be help from the outside in determining how to do this. And she's talking about surveys for teachers and for students that might be ones that we pull out certain indicators from. So.
But the fact is, we don't just want kids who do well on standardized tests.
No.
It's never been our goal. We've just never tried to get our arms around.
And today and yesterday, the kids who were at this symposium said that loudly and clearly. They go, do not measure how well we're doing on a standardized test. This is not who we are. Didn't they? Loud and clear, several times.
Yes.
All right, so thank you, Molly.
You're
Thank you very
welcome.
much. A lot of work. And we will, I know at least the CBU board's having another discussion, maybe with the board chairs, we can talk about how we talk about moving forward and get back to the board with a recommendation for that. So with that, and I'm going to ask for a motion to go into executive session. For those of you in the audience who are not, everyone on the board is welcome to come. If you're here and you're not on the board, sit tight. We're going to be gone for about 15 minutes and then we'll be back. So can I have a motion to go into executive session? Second?
Second.
Thank you.